All righty, how you guys doing? Good. Hey, you're back to Pastelli. I like that. I was getting a little concerned there for a second there. But anyway, good to see you guys. We got a lot of ground to cover tonight. And as always, we're going to start off with some exciting announcements. And of course, our first announcement is Ken Michael from Jan Markell Ministries. He'll be here, Lord willing, Sunday, February 20th. And he'll be preaching for us the satanic setup for the one world government is the topic I believe that he'll be covering, what's going on in the world. Are we headed for a one world government maybe? Possibly? Anything going on geopolitically that's shocker? Yes, this we are. So he's going to be here for that. Just to remind you, also, Lord willing, Pastor Tom Hughes, Hope for Our Times Ministry, he'll be speaking here March 27th. So keep that on your calendar. And if we're live and we're here, please be sure to attend with that. But hey, we want to welcome you here tonight. And if this is your first time, or if you've been here a while, but you've yet to fill out one of these exciting Connect cards, somewhere around you should be one of these critters. And if you can fill that out for us with your name and some contact info for us so we can connect with you, that kind of helps us, especially if you leave some contact info. And but if you could do some check boxes there, if you got some questions about the church or membership or prayer requests, things of that nature. And if you could put it in one of the two offering boxes there in the back, that would be greatly appreciated as we exit. So also we not only want to welcome you here, we want to welcome part of our online family from around the world. And that's right, tonight we're going all the way to Romania. So Sava, she's been tuning into our studies and asking for prayer and just getting connected and things of that nature. And of course, I would assume maybe that's her son. He's a happy guy. And she's probably fixing beef stroganoff or something cool like that. That would be my guess. And I'm sticking to it, Rick. So let's just roll with it. But anyway, we want to welcome her, one of our online family members tuning in, Saba, all the way from Romania on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Nice. Now, how would you do a Romanian accent? Was that it? That did not sound Romanian to me. But we'll just move on from that. That was a little scary. But hey, speaking of which, if you are interested in our online membership, if you know somebody outside of Vegas, and if they're looking for a good, healthy Bible church to be a part of, shoot us an email at membership@getalifemedia.net. We'll get you plugged in, orbiting the planet with Pastor Bobby, Lord willing. Also, prayer requests. If you got a prayer request here, or if you're watching online, part of our family online, that's the fastest way really to get that to our prayer team, prayer@getalifemedia.net. And that's right, internship ministry starts this Monday. In fact, Lord willing, tonight we're going to have our first orientation meeting. So it's happening, it's going on. And the good news is we might be able to get a round 2 going here, hopefully soon. And the need has just been great. So basically bringing the seminary once again to Sunrise and getting equipped with my alma mater at tyndale.edu. So all the way to the doctoral level that you can go. Multiple doctorates if you want to, if you're hooked on all that stuff. And but you can do it right now here at Sunrise. Speaking of which, that's right, our new homeschool ministry. Hey, that's right, Arlene. The new homeschool ministry on Mondays is meeting here at Sunrise as well. Arlene, you want to raise your hand? Yay! So if you have questions, you'd like to be a part of that journey down that route to get your kids out of the sewer pipe called secular education. Sorry, just being blunt. Go to see Arlene and get hooked up and get more information about that. But they meet here on Mondays, the co-op, all kinds of other activities that they do during the week. You can get connected as well as get your kid a great education. Certainly not only secular good knowledge. How many guys realize that math probably comes in handy? Yeah. And, things of that nature. But that's not what's being taught in schools today, is it? No, not at all. You're getting all that other garbage. So not only that, but you also get a good biblical education as well for your child. And a great godly atmosphere, godly friends, godly fellowship, things of that nature. So we made it about as easy as you can to take the whole education for your family, all the way from crumb snatcher to a doctorate. You can now do it here at Sunrise. So that's pretty cool. Amen? All right. Well, hey, we were finished up last week with our study, The World Religions, Cults, and the Occult, number 15, dealing with Satanism and the rise of devil worship. We're now moving on to our next one, number 16, Voodoo, Vampires, and the Rise of Demon Worship. Ooh. Is that scary, Mary? You know, I didn't even mean for that to rhyme like that, but it just flowed, right? You know what I'm saying? I caught it, and so did Andy. But anyway, the rest of you, wake up. But anyway, so that's our next topic, Voodoo, Vampires, and the Rise of Demon Worship. So as we've done before, before we really get into the meat of that new study in the occult, we're going to be doing kind of a video intro. And I want to just kind of let you know that as crazy as it sounds, what do you mean demon worship? People are going to be worshiping demons. Yeah, it's already happening. It's not just coming, it's already happening. And it's giving rise to the culture that the Bible talks about in the 7-year tribulation, that they will literally be intermingling with, commingling with, communicating with, thinking they're the greatest things since sliced breads, demons. Not just witchcraft, not just Satanism, but actual demons. Okay, so that's what we're going to get into tonight. But as always, let's open up in the Word, Deuteronomy chapter 18. Once again, let's remind ourselves why that's not a good thing to do. To communicate, commune with, mess with, play around with demons, let alone think that they're great and they're a great source of information and inspiration. Deuteronomy chapter 18 and verse 9 is where we'll start. My heading here is detestable practices, right? How many guys, when you get up every day, you go like, I wonder what I could do. I wonder what detestable practice I could do. Yeah, hopefully no hands go up on that one. Well, if you ever wonder what, man, how many guys say, I don't want to do something that God would consider detestable? How about that? Raise your hand. Okay, all three of you, praise God. That's neat. Okay, the rest of you pay attention. Okay, well, if you ever wonder something that God considers detestable, okay, here you go. This isn't all of them, but this is one of them. And guess what it is? Don't mess with demons. Don't have nothing to do with them, right? And the practices that invoke and invite demonic activity, right? So it's all enough time. Deuteronomy 18 verse 9 says this, when you enter the land the Lord your God has given you, do not learn to imitate the what? Detestable ways of the nations there. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices his son or daughter in the fire. Now stop right there. What's that? That was the god we saw before, Molech, right? Where they would, he was a big giant statue, hollow inside. They would heat him up with fire underneath, and he literally would begin to glow red from the heat. And then his arms were out, and then the people, the pagan culture, would throw their babies into the arms of Molech alive for favor, good crops, and a better life and things of that nature. What's the modern Molech? Abortion. And what's the rationale that people do? Well, for a better life, because I ain't got time for this kid, or that was a mistake. It's sick. God says, don't imitate that. That's what no. And if you ever want more study on that, we did 8 weeks on our study, Abortion, the Mass Murder of Children. We dealt with that in great detail. But unfortunately, that's going on today. But not only that, every single one of these that's mentioned here that's detestable to God besides that is also going on today, right? He says this, let no one be found among you who sacrifices his son or daughter in the fire, who practices what? Divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in what? Witchcraft, or cast spells, or who is a what? Medium, or a spiritist, or who consults the dead. And that's where you're going to get into your demonic activity, right? Because if somebody says that, hey, that was my Aunt Vera, she appeared to be... When you die, you either go straight into heaven, you go straight into hell, and you don't come back. How many guys are glad as a born-again Christian when you go straight into heaven, you don't come back? Who wants to come back? I don't want to come back, right? So if an entity, we dealt with this in our witchcraft study, so as an entity does appear and even sounds like Aunt Vera, so to speak, or looks like, or seems to whatever, whoever, whatever, what is it? The Bible calls that a demon, a familiar spirit, right? And where are these people getting their inspirations, these mediums, these spiritists, that they supposedly get this secret knowledge that, it's from demons, right? Okay, and God says, don't do that. Anyone who consults the dead, right? Anyone who does these things is what? Detestable to the Lord. And because of these how many times has he got to say it? And again, what's the biblical interpretation rule? Anything that you see repeated in the scripture, right? It's God basically going with the megaphone. Hey, I really want you to pay attention to this. All of his word is good, but you really got to pay attention to this. God doesn't just say in his word that he is holy. He's what? He is holy, he is holy, he is holy. Why? Because you got to understand the holiness of God. If you don't understand the holiness of God, you have no idea why in the world Jesus went to the cross and why that's such an amazing act of love. If you don't understand the holiness of God, you don't understand why God has to punish sin, why there is a hell in the first. You got to understand. And so here we have God saying, detestable, detestable, this is detestable. How many guys would say that God kind of thinks these things are not good? Detestable, right? Do you get it? He's getting your attention. All right. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of these detestable practices, the Lord will drive out those nations before you. You, though, must be blameless before the Lord your God. Now, let's back up a little bit to where it talks about a medium, a spiritist, or those who consult the dead. It's all demonic because, again, the Bible's very clear. When a person dies, you ain't coming back, okay? So obviously that tells you there's some sort of demonic manipulation going on there. And frankly, you got two possibilities when you get to people like psychics or fortune tellers. Let me tell you your fortune, right? There's one right down the street here in Lake Mead. Do you see it? We need to pray, folks, right? And so typically you got two options. Now, some of the information that these people are receiving, these so-called psychics or mediums and spiritists and whatever, it's either going to be flat out chicanery, okay, and I'll explain that in a second, or they really are in communion with demons. Either way, it's detestable. These critters lie. Why? Because who they follow? Satan, John chapter 8. He's a what? He's the liar and the father of all lies, right? So they eventually they're going to lie. They can't help but lie. And we'll see that tonight. They will eventually show their true colors, okay? Even if they even appear as an angel of light, sooner or later they're going to lie. They just can't help it, right? But anyway, so let me explain to that. So some of these people, they might get some psychic powers and they knew, and let me give you an example. Some police forces, I hear, have actually used psychic people to lead them to a place of murder. And so, they say, they bring in the psychic person because they got a cold case going on. And the person goes, yes, I think their body is over here, at this place over here in the desert. And they go out there and they find the body. They've got secret powers. No. Okay. Now, I don't doubt that maybe they heard a voice or something, had an experience that kind of showed them in their brain where this scene was, but that's no big shakes. Who do you think was there at the time of the murder? Demons. So, of course, they would know where the body's at. So there's nothing new there. But what that does is it leads people away from God. And it puts people's mindsets away from God and so-called validates psychics. So let's keep going down this route. These are the ones with the real truth. These are the ones with the real powers. There's no big deal, right? But it's all to lead people away. And God says that's detestable, right? They lie to you. They manipulate you. They lead you away from God. Now, that's a kind of a demon one. Some of it, I think, is just, frankly, learned tricks of the trade, chicanery, if you will, to use that word. Let me give you some examples. We talked about this before in some of our earlier studies on this, but they do what's called cold readings and warm readings. Been there, done that in the New Age when I was involved in that stuff. And basically how they dupe people, and there's no even contact with demons except for they're lying, but they'll come and say, let me read your fortune, right? Now, first of all, the person's coming in, paying this entity, this so-called psychic or medium, to, quote, tell them something about their future or whatever. So they come in with an attitude of expectation, right? That's the first problem. You kind of expect something to happen. But it doesn't even have to be some sort of real thing, real power, okay? For instance, they'll come in, the cold read is they just look at the person. You can learn a lot from the person just by observing, really, right? So for instance, maybe a lady comes in to see a psychic, right? And all that psychic has got to do is, number one, they do a cold read and they look at how that lady's wearing. And if they see that the lady is kind of wearing, she's kind of nice, she's very particular about her appearance, very well dressed and things of that nature, then the psychic just says, hey, I'm feeling like you're really really into the professional and you really care about, how did you know? I just looked at your outfit. There's no big deal about that, right? Or another trick, easy, is watch. You look for, is there a ring on the finger? And then you could use that to manipulate the person. There's no ring on the finger? Then what do you say? I just feel like the spirits are telling me that you've longed for relationships and you've had challenges and you're still longing for that perfect relationship. How did you know? You're so... Because you ain't got no wedding ring on. Or if you got a wedding ring on, then you flip it around. And it's like, they're telling me that you're having challenges in your relationships, specifically your marriage. How did you know? Because you got a wedding ring, and name one couple that doesn't have challenges in their marriage. Hello. There's nothing about it's all chicanery, right? Things of that nature. Now, another thing that they'll do is say, let me see your hands. Let me see your hands, right? And again, dude, they got jewelry. Are they? Oh, you've always had a fine taste in finer things of life. Well, how'd you know? Because you're chock full of rings, and right. Or they'll go like they'll feel a person's hand. They got calluses. You've always worked hard. You're just a hard worker. How did you know? Because you got calluses, you dumb, right? And so, or let me do the other one. They go the other one, the warmer. They go fishing. They fishing. They let you fill in the blank, and you're already with this heightened expectation, right? And they'll say, well, the spirits are telling me that your family, there's some concerns with your family. And hello again, who doesn't have concerns with family, right? And then they'll go fishing. They're just waiting for you to fill in the blank for them. And I think it's your parent, and I think it's your mom. Now what they'll do is they'll look at the person's response, and if they don't fill in that blank, if they're like the mom, and the person goes like, as if like, I ain't got no problem with my mom. They don't say that, but you can tell by the body language, right? And then they'll pick up on it, and then they'll quickly go, no, but you've dealt with that. You've dealt with that. It's more your father. How did you know? Because you filled in the blank for them, right? So that's what's going on with a lot of stuff. So again, this stuff, this medium spiritism, we're going to get into a big giant study on this because it isn't just our world's fast heading towards witchcraft and Satanism. That was our last two studies. Okay, it's demon worship, right? And the Bible says that's going to be carbon culture. Now, fast forward to the New Testament now, and we're actually going to see that this fact that people are now interacting with demons, worshiping demons, is a sign you're in the last days. Shocker, just like the other two. So open your Bibles now to 1 Timothy 4. 1 Timothy 4 real quick, and then we'll start our video. And in our video, you're going to see actual people who are actually demon-possessed. All right, this is the more spiritual side, not so much the chicanery side that I just explained. And so you get this is really going on. And again, Satan does what he always does. Don't call it demon worship. Don't call it being a medium. It's channeling. And the spirit guides are telling them things. And what you will also know is they mention UFOs, aliens, which tells you that too is a demonic deception. We dealt with that before. 1 Timothy 4, just verse 1 says this. The Spirit clearly says, in other words, no question about it. Hang your hat on this, baby. The Spirit clearly says that in the latter times, some will what? Abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by what? Demons. You mean to tell me that people are actually going to be following, listening, and purposely being deceived by demons, and it's going to be increase across the world, and then that's actually a sign you're yeah. Now again, as I warned you in some of the recent studies, tonight you're going to see it again. You're going to see a mullet. You are. And I'm telling you, the reason why I got to go back to bring these studies is because I'm telling you, folks, it's been a good 30 years since the church has dealt with any of these issues. So to give you examples, I got to go back in time. So it's not just because I'm hooked on mullets, right? Or denim jeans, okay? Remember the wet hair look? Okay, whatever. I'm dating myself. But anyway, it's because that's how far we got to go back. But again, you're going to see, now again, what you're going to see, granted maybe be 20, 30 years old, if you will, as you can see by the hairstyles and colors and clothes. But it's done nothing but increase. But you're going to see again tonight actual people who are actually demon-possessed. They've been tricked into thinking that you don't need this book. You don't need to listen to the Bible. You don't need Christianity. You go straight to these entities, demons. You interact with them, and that's what will bring you fulfillment in life. Okay? So let's go ahead and we'll watch that tonight.
I climbed down a ladder. I just close my eyes and start visualizing myself climbing down a ladder, and I get to the bottom rung. I sort of spiral backwards. I kind of just dive backwards, and then each circle gets bigger and bigger, a little slower and slower, and eventually I just kind of drift off, and the next thing I know, I open my eyes, and it could be 5 minutes or 5 hours later.
Whatever was coming through was a master, absolute master of manipulation. They or it knew something.
I allow it to occur, and I can feel the energy coming around me. It's sort of like, not like sticking your finger in a wall socket, but something less than that, and you feel it in you. You know it's present.
How do you know who you're talking to? That's one of the questions I ask these people. How can you really be sure of the identity of this entity? That ought to frighten you. Maybe they're misrepresenting themselves. They got no ID.
If you put their statements under a microscope, you'll find, especially the ones about past life, you find out that something is wrong here, that the picture is not complete.
Without a doubt, if it is for real, you'll be opening up doors that are meant to remain closed, just like I did, and eventually you'll have spirit entities controlling you.
They say that there's like not a lot of difference in some ways. Actually, they're talking to me about it right now.
It is called channeling, where the physical body is only the vehicle. The vocal cords resound with non-physical voices. The phenomenon is widespread. There are thousands of channelers in North America alone, and millions of adherents come from all walks of life, seeking the wisdom of the so-called spirit guides. Who are these voices? Extraterrestrials? Ascended masters? Highly evolved spirit beings? These are just some of their claims.
It will laugh. It will laugh.
The practice itself is difficult for any of us to accept at face value. Is the supernatural interacting with the natural? Are spirits really in contact with humans? If so, who are the voices making the claims and providing the information?
With the Edgar Cayce style, deep trance style, there came through a group of guides numbering in the thousands, several thousands, and in time they gave their name and they call themselves Starfleet.
They have told me that they are extraterrestrial intelligences from another star system. I guess is the closest thing you could say, and yet they're also multidimensional beings. Even though they do have physical forms, they're not quite the same as ours are. And there are others too that I've seen that are extraterrestrial, that look different from them, but they seem to work together.
Another channeler, Pat Rodegast, channels a spirit called Emmanuel. In her book simply called Emmanuel's Book, Rodegast describes her first encounter. The first time I saw Emmanuel, he appeared, as he still does, as a being of golden light. Steve White channels a group of entities who take on yet a different form.
I channel several different beings. There are beings that are termed the spiritual hierarchy and the Ashtar Command. All of a sudden everybody goes, ooh, the Ashtar Command, UFOs and stuff. But the Ashtar Command, they're etheric beings. They're not in a physical embodiment like we have. And as one evolves from, let's say, the third dimensional plane to others, they can choose different aspects of service. And the Ashtar Command are ascended masters who have chosen to be in service to different planets going through transition.
Ageron's about 8 feet tall. He's slim, but very powerful. His main emanation seems to be in the blue range, the blues, the violets, the purples. Actually, I called him Blue for many years because I couldn't hear his name. Even Ageron is only a very small portion of his real name, because their names are comprised of all their experience and all their knowledge. And we just don't have the vocal cords or the comprehension to be able to say their whole name. So they've given me little bits of their names.
The expertless experts.
Jacques Purcell is internationally renowned. He channels Lazarus, a non-physical entity whose teachings have influenced the lives of thousands of people through public lectures, video and audio tapes, and personal consultation.
Who is he? That's a good question. He's never been physical, and he's never had a body form. That's disturbs some people because they assume because I'm physical and because you're physical, everybody in the universe has been physical and have all been here on Earth or whatever. We're starting to accept the idea that maybe there are life forms that are other than on Earth, and maybe eventually we can accept the idea that there are life forms that don't have bodies either. He's one of those. He refers to himself as a consciousness, an intelligence, a spark of love, a spark of light without form. And that's probably the best description of what he is. Who he is just this incredible loving energy that seems to be here to not save us and not do for us, but to befriend us and help us do for ourselves. It's nothing mysterious. I don't know if it would work for everybody, but it seems to work for me, and that is I climb down a ladder. I just close my eyes and start visualizing myself climbing down a ladder, and when I get to the bottom rung, I sort of spiral backwards. I kind of just dive backwards, and then each circle gets bigger and bigger, a little slower and slower, and eventually I just kind of drift off, and the next thing I know, I open my eyes, and it could be 5 minutes or 5 hours later, and I know something must have happened because I always feel good afterwards. So that's how I do it, and yeah, I've done it now for as many as 10 or 12 times a day, or once a day at least, for 13 years now.
I relax, and I developed my own relaxation technique, which everyone would find for themselves to be unique. I relax. I raise my vibrational frequency by bringing my thoughts to thankfulness and joy and love and such higher thought form frequencies, as well as I visualize moving into a lighter and more refined vibration of existence. It's so I imagine light and refined feeling. And from there, I connect with my source, and this source I allow to blend with my energy. Of course, I'm familiar with this source, and I feel like I fill up with golden light. I feel like I'm filling up with golden light, and it's grounded right down to my feet, and they just start speaking from there. They speak through me. I step aside, and because I step aside, that is why I go into a trance state.
I just step aside. I just get out of the way. And it's possible that like a main portion of my energy body steps aside, leaving the portion that keeps the heart going and the lungs going and everything there. And then that part of Ageron, or whoever is speaking, will come in and utilize my form.
That area of the spiritual realm that reach down to humankind, call them angelic being, extraterrestrials, whatever, that reach down, they are available for us to channel from, to reach, to help guide our lives, to help us make this a better place so that we are more about the divine plan down here, the plan that was originally brought into being when life was brought about. And you can reach that realm and be guided to them by meditating.
There was a natural talent who didn't really know anything about me except I was a psychic. She doesn't know anything about channeling. She doesn't know from extraterrestrials. And at some point, we were kind of like doing a meditation together. And suddenly she looked at me and she said, "You seem to have a veil all around you." And she continued looking. She says, "No, it's not a veil. It's like a shower of light." And she starts looking up, and she goes, "Oh my." I said, "What do you see?" She proceeded to describe the three to me. Says it's like they're in some sort of spaceship, but of course it's not a spaceship. She didn't want to, I'm sure, appear that she was like seeing things. And she says there's these three beings. Each of them have a different thing they're supposed to do, but they do it together. And she's just looking up. And she says, and they seem to be different colors. Now, she didn't know anything about this, about me.
In Hungry Ghosts, investigative journalist Joe Fisher examines the phenomenon of channeling and the spirit world. He discusses the origins.
Well, the earliest recorded information that we have is really with the ancient Greeks and the Greek oracles, when priestesses would be dressed in white and would go into a trance and bring through voices and prophecies to the assembled gathering. Channeling has been known by a number of different names in different cultures over the centuries, but it next rears its head in a major way with the Victorians in the last century.
Alexander Blair Ewart, editor of Dimensions magazine, has studied the resurgence of channeling and its pagan beginnings.
Trance-channeling basically emerged in the mid-1800s when science had destroyed Western religion, essentially. Something that had been repressed for about 2,000 years, which was paganism, and earlier atavistic forms of religion came gushing to the surface. So suddenly you had this pagan approach to the spirit that had been repressed for a couple of thousand years and it suddenly floated to the surface.
When mediums would sit in a seance and sit among people who came into this seance room to listen to the words of the entities who were speaking through the medium, and these entities were often Chinese and Red Indian guides. Why they prevailed, we don't know, but often the guides who spoke through, and I use the word guides in quotes, the entities who came through were often Red Indian and Chinese, and would make pronouncements about the lives of the sitters in that room, would tell them much about themselves, would be able to speak clairvoyantly about the people who are gathered around the medium. And the medium would be insensible, would be often sitting back with their eyes closed, and would just pronounce in a monotone voices. And the voices would often change as different entities would come through.
It seems that mostly people are using channeling at this stage in less of a 19th century way, where you went to get a message from your Auntie Mary who'd, passed over 10 years ago, and where the messages were very much in terms of the medium coming through and saying, I've got your Auntie Mary here and here's some advice. Now people seem to be drawing on channeling from the point of view of saying, which is why ultimately I don't think channeling is dangerous, because the way that the individual interacts with it is, and I've done a lot of research, talked to hundreds and hundreds of people, they tend to say, well, I get this kind of information from the channeled entity. I take from it what I want to use. I take from it what I feel comfortable with, and I try to develop myself spiritually through that.
I think that channeling is part of the end result of the me generation. It's people looking to see how much they can personalize themselves, how much they can get into their own things, how much they can, get their own goodies, and here's another goodie they can get. But that's only a small part of it. I think a larger part of it is that you're finding in our society today a tremendous fear and anxiety and a need for some kind of authority which will give people direction.
What has drawn me to channeling is that in religious structures, they're precisely that, they're a structure. And if you're looking for a sense of security and conformity, then you go and you find their answers. But channeling is a way that helps you find your own answers. And it makes your life far more meaningful. You're not dependent on someone to tell you who you are, what you should do.
We are a culture which is now what I would call rejecting many of the assumptions that we've lived with for the past 300 years. For example, the assumption that the rational is the only way of knowing truth. And so you have that being in some ways pushed aside, and people saying, no, that there are many other ways of finding truth. And one of those ways of finding truth is to connect with another reality, a spirit reality or a spiritual reality. And so there's a searching after that.
Traditional religion never did it for me. External authority never did it for me. I always felt there was something inside there that needed to come up to the surface. So I studied altered states of consciousness. One day a friend was leading me through a meditation, and I sensed an energy in the room. And to make a long story short, the energy was very loving, very benevolent, and I got a sense that it wanted to drop in to my body.
And this is really an introduction of what we would call a neo-paganism. It's a reintroduction into the West of beliefs that have been around for thousands upon thousands of years, that there are in fact spiritual entities and spiritual realities both in nature and outside of nature, and we can contact them. So I think all of that comes together at a time when people are very insecure, they're searching for direction, they want answers, they want certainty, but they feel all the old ways of giving answers are not appropriate. And so there are certain groups of people who are now wanting to tune in to spirits that can give them help and can give them direction.
Joe Fisher had researched metaphysics for many years before encountering the world of channeling. In his book, Fisher tells how he was invited to the home of a woman he calls Aviva, who claimed that there were entities from another dimension speaking through her. A small group of people gathered weekly to witness the various voices who would take control of Aviva.
I was so impressed with the accents, the personalities, the different languages that were produced by Aviva in her trance state, that I said to my friends, and among them several journalists, you've got to see this. You've got to come to this house and witness this for yourself, which they did. And the group, by me introducing people, by these other people also introducing other people, the group swelled to close to 30 at its peak.
He phoned up and said, you know, I found this group that meets on Friday night, and you know, it's just great, and you've got to come and see what's happening. And I think, you know, the intimation was that this was almost a secret society.
And so you can imagine there was Aviva lying down on her Chesterfield with her little pink slippers pointed towards the ceiling, going into trance, and she would switch from one voice to another, that is, different guide, so-called guide, speaking through her, as each different person in the room would speak, and they would go around the room, and they would never introduce themselves. A voice would come out, and immediately the voice that she was producing would change in accordance with the voice that asked the question.
And all of these entities, these beings, were what we would call inside of her physical body. We would see a lot of changes that would take over. It wasn't just the voices, but in being relatively close to her as these beings were coming through, I could see the difference. I could see the characteristics of these entities as they came through. Her body and particularly her face would change.
Her eyes were closed. She couldn't see this. It was all done. I don't know how it was done. To this day, I have many questions about just what was going on. But all I know is that Laurence Olivier, on his finest day at the Old Vic, could never have produced this array of different inflections and voices and languages within a space of an hour.
Each one of us had a major guide. Like Russell was her guide, and Tuktu was mine.
And I spoke to the entity that came forward, Russell Parnick, and he described himself as a sheep farmer from the last century. That was his last incarnation. And he proceeded to tell me that I had a guide too who was looking after me on the earthbound plane, or rather, the guide was in the disembodied realm. And her name was Philippa, she was Greek, that her and I had been together in Greece in the 18th century, and it was now her responsibility in this other realm to oversee my spiritual development while I was on Earth.
Fisher was intrigued by the entity claiming to be Philippa, his spirit guide. While it was speaking through Aviva, he taped the voice and took it to a linguistic specialist at the University of Toronto to verify its authenticity.
This man's name is Dr. George Thaniel, and he's a native-born Greek himself. So I thought the perfect, the linguistics professor who is a Greek by birth. He listened to 2 tapes of Philippa speaking, and he said, in part, this is a native-born Greek woman speaking. So I thought, well, there is proof that Aviva is not concocting this. She hasn't just been to the library, read some Greek, and then is making it up for me. And even if she were to learn Greek, she would be unable to speak with the voice of a native-born Greek.
With such impressive evidence, Fisher embarked on a journey to validate the claims of the guides. Had they lived previous lives?
Joe's involvement and that became quite enhanced. He had decided at that point that this was something unique and marvelous, and that he was going to write a book on channeling and bring out all of this wonderful information that we were given, and actually go and source these various entities. I mean, you have to realize that there was 25 or 30 people in this time had been involved, and each one of them had guides, and each one of these guides had lifetimes and backgrounds, and he was going to find proof of Russell's existence and proof of his guide's existence, and that was going to be part of the book, and that was going to substantiate this wonderful information.
Fisher's first trip took him to England, where Aviva's spirit guide Russell Parnick claimed to have lived as an 18th century sheep farmer.
He spoke about living near the village of Heathfield in Yorkshire, and the village, I visited it. It was there just as he had described, just a few houses and a little church, this sort of thing. And Russell spoke about the Druids' stones nearby, which were half a day's ride away on horseback, you know, touchingly evoked in last century language, and that was there just as he said. He said he had a 22-acre farm. I wasn't able to find the farm, but he said that the farm abutted onto the Burn Gill, which was a little stream that ran into the larger Nidderdale River, and the stream and the river were there. However, when I came to the litmus test again of finding Russell Parnick, I searched high and low in the records, in the church records, in the government records. He was nowhere to be found.
Another guide, Ernest, claimed to have been a bomber pilot with the Royal Air Force in 99 Squadron in World War II. Once again, Fisher went to great lengths to prove this claim, even interviewing surviving members of the squadron, only to leave disappointed.
Now, most of the historical and geographical information he had provided was accurate, was there. There was only one problem. Ernest, the bomber pilot, did not exist. I couldn't find him in the records. So I came back to Toronto, and I told him I was much impressed with the fact that all this information was there. There was just this one problem, that I couldn't find him. Then he went into a great song and dance about karma, how he has a charge sitting in his room who he must look after. And he had realized too late that the information he was giving me might be detrimental to the welfare of his charge, who's on the earthbound plane, and he had decided, he said, to change the information, to backtrack. Now, I argued with him at great length. I said, you could have told me this before I left if you'd felt this. And even so, you started off by giving me your name before you had this change of mind, and the name that I was looking for was just not in the records. And he weaseled and whined and invoked the higher laws. So he got out of it. But the question remained with me. Was Ernest telling the truth? Was he not? I will have to check out other guides to find out whether this is true or not.
The obvious choice of guides to investigate was his own Philippa, whom he had come to trust as a result of his personal effort to make contact.
You see, initially, Philippa encouraged me to contact her, and that she said that rather than just go through a medium, the best way to contact your guide was directly. And she said that if I concentrated on her every day for 15 minutes or more, that I would be able to make this contact after a period of time. And so every morning I would go up to my study, and I would train myself, my mind, on making contact with her. Nothing happened for weeks and weeks and weeks, but eventually an image of a woman walking towards me in a white wrap was presented to my inner vision. And I was convinced that this was Philippa, and my response was to weep, and I cried for several minutes. And again, when I went back to the group, Philippa, I didn't have to say anything. Philippa said, you see, we have made contact. And again, this is another one of the bricks in the wall.
So he said, well, yeah, he was going to go off, and his guide, who loved him dearly and certainly would not deceive him, had given him all this information, and he had maps and research, and he was going to go and find her. He couldn't find Russell. You know, the entity known as Russell had never been born in that parish or lived in that place, but enough of it fitted. I mean, he knew the general area, same as Ernest knew about World War II bombers and things like that. But Joe knew that he he could never be deceived by his guide.
Now, I then went to Greece looking for Philippa, and a similar thing happened. I was looking for the village of Theros, which she had said was only 5 days' walk away from the Black Sea, again touchingly evoked in the old ancient language, which made me believe her initially. I went to the town of Alexandroupolis in northeastern Greece, and it was there that the edifice on which her testimony was based on, which was already crumbling because of the failure of her colleagues to pan out. I had expected Alexandroupolis to be an ancient city based on Alexander the Great, and when I went there, I found that it wasn't, and that in fact that Alexandroupolis was only built, I think it was at the beginning of this century, at the end of the last century, and Philippa was talking about it having existed in her day, and this could not have been. So I carried on my search there, looking for more clues to her existence. But Philippa, even though her Greek had been veridical, Philippa too went the same way, and it was a wrenching disillusionment for me.
Mike Mandel is a Canadian entertainer and lecturer. For many years, he was involved in various aspects of the occult, including spirit mediumship. Dozens of entities would speak through him on an ongoing basis.
I became involved in what is now known as channeling in the late 1960s. It was a spontaneous experience. We had been trying astral travel and a group of other techniques to let our spirits leave our bodies, to develop clairvoyant abilities, and so on. And when I say we, I mean a small group of us that had polarized together around an occult worldview. By trying these different techniques, I inadvertently opened myself up, and various entities began speaking through me. Initially speaking in my head, and then eventually taking over to such a degree they were using my vocal cords and speaking through me to our friends.
Mike could literally be talking to you as I'm talking to you now, and instantly, in a moment, change and be taken over, and someone else would be talking. And his voice would literally stop being Mike and all of a sudden be somebody else.
Initially, it seemed to take them quite a bit of effort to take control of me. And it was more or less a voluntary thing. But as time passed, I realized that it was getting much, much easier for them to slip in and out. We used to call it someone popping in. We'd say, oh, so-and-so just popped in when you were gone. And they would appear sometimes for hours, sometimes for just a few minutes. And then we realized eventually that they were able to go in and out as they pleased by the end of things. And we asked one of the entities, someone asked on my behalf and said, why is it that you can get in and out of Mike's personality so readily? And they said something to the effect of, all human beings have a door that will keep other spirit beings out. And in most people's cases, the door is locked and barred and stapled shut and roped shut and sealed. And they said in my case, it was virtually hanging off the hinges.
They claimed to be distinctive entities. In other words, if they had a name, they would say their name. If they had a purpose or a distinctive, they would tell you that in many cases. But the range would range from very what we call low-level life forms that really didn't seem to have any purpose except to be pranksters, that sort of thing, on up to through the sort of human range, right on up to the what you call ascended masters, the wise, benevolent, powerful type entities, and the antithesis of that, the evil, powerful, intelligent entities as well.
They claim to be ascended masters, highly advanced spirit beings, even on other planets, people on various astral planes who had reincarnated and then gone on to perfection, Tibetan Buddhists, people from the past. I mean, there was an entire realm of things that they called themselves. However, the common thread was they were all spiritually pure and were contacting our little group specifically to help us evolve spiritually.
Warder often witnessed strange occurrences. He feared the darker controlling entities, one of whom regularly threatened him with knives. Still, he was fascinated by the spirit's powers.
One evening when I was over at Mike's place, we were just sitting talking when all of a sudden one of the entities popped in and became visibly angry with, I think, primarily myself. And began ranting and raving. I can't remember the exact words he was saying, but he got up and sort of stormed off into the kitchen. My habit being to always follow Mike into the kitchen or anywhere where there were knives present. And so I just followed, but I was very concerned with what was going on. As I got to the doorway of the kitchen, Mike, quote, Mike was standing and had picked up 2 Coke bottles off the counter, 2 26-ounce Coke bottles, and held them both out in front of him and crushed them simultaneously, one in each hand. Then, unfortunately, Mike, the entity left, and Mike was not able to come back right away. And in that delay time, Mike fell forward into the broken glass, cutting his, I don't know if his hands were cut at that moment or when he actually crushed the bottles, but they were cut fairly badly. He was obviously in shock when he came back. I got him up, moved him to the couch in the living room, and again he was taken over, this time by another entity which seemed much gentler, more benevolent, and held out his hands in a very almost pathetic sort of way and said, "Do the wounds on my hands seem familiar to you?" And now we had an entity who was claiming to be or imitating Christ.
One of the things the entities used to do was they used to test us. It was as though we were being brainwashed. We'd be told to do something very bizarre immediately, or we'd be told to go at midnight to this certain forest that was very, very terrifying to us because there'd been a number of manifestations there. We'd be told to go alone there at midnight and stay there for an hour and then come home. And they were testing our readiness to respond immediately to their commands. And we were not to test them ever, because they always said proof comes to those who do not ask for it, which sounds vaguely biblical, but it isn't. And I recall one time, one of the entities was put to the test. One of the particular people in the group suddenly spoke to it in German. And the entity, without missing a beat, stopped its sentence with the other person, turned and addressed him in flawless German, and then turned back and continued the conversation. Well, none of us knew German. None of us had studied it at any time. But the entity was able to switch in and out of the other language immediately.
This was something that nobody was supposed to know, and we couldn't tell anybody at all. But the big thing was she was dying of leukemia, and just as this remarkable coincidence, you know, the hand of fate, the intervention of God in the universe, I was the only person that could help her, and if I didn't do this, she was going to die.
The guides told him that he was the only member of the group who had healing powers that could be used to help Aviva recover from her leukemia. They brought him in, they brought him closer to Aviva. They then advised the previous hypnotist that his time was up and that Sanford should be looking after her in her trance state, and that Sanford could do the healing, and that's why he should become the leader of the group. So this is what happened, and Sanford, in giving the healing, being instructed by the guides to place his hands on Aviva's body, and he would feel through his fingers great sensations of cold or heat, depending on the instructions the guides were giving him.
I could actually feel these energies flowing, and feel the results of them, and it would take a long time to describe, but there were many different physical manifestations of this.
If Aviva had a serious pain problem with her leukemia, she would call Sanford. He'd come rushing down, talk her into trance, administer the healing, bring her back, and then he would talk to Russell, the main guide, and Russell would say, "Great job, Sanford, you know. Without you, we couldn't carry on."
What was actually happening was that I was suffering some real physical and mental and emotional problems because of all of the, not only demands, but also because of all this energy that was going through. And only after the fact, when I broke clean and got away from it, did I realize that they were doing it. They were creating this dependency. I would have to go and not only heal her, but put her down and ask them, being Russell and Tuck too, who was supposedly my guide, to channel energies through me to sort of balance my energies or fix me, because I was getting right weird. You know, these strange energies were flowing through me, and I was having hallucinations and all kinds of physical problems. And geez, these guys were really great. You know, about 10 minutes with them flowing energy through me, and I was fine. I was like an addict that just had a hit. You know, I was great. I just fell on top of the world. It was only afterwards I realized they were doing it. They were creating it. They were creating a dependency.
And so he found that he was like a psychic drug addict. He would be going to Aviva not only to help her restore her health, but in fact to pump up his own flagging energies. It was only when he pulled away that he began to realize, hey, you know, I feel better. And he said he realized that he felt better because he was no longer under their sphere of influence.
Sanford Ellison went into channeling with no background training in metaphysics or meditation or in the use of higher mind or in the use of discrimination. It appears that the entity was well aware of that.
But Sanford Ellison did not lack training. As a practicing psychic, he had much experience in the realm of metaphysics. However, this training did not prove to be a safeguard.
I was really what you would call over the edge. I was not rational throughout that time, and it had got to that point. I was totally dependent on them, whoever they were, and outside of that, I was just subject to illusions and delusions and forces that I had no understanding of.
Famous mystic Emanuel Swedenborg spent an entire lifetime associating with the spirit world, yet he warned, when the spirits begin to speak with a man, he ought to beware that he believes nothing whatever from them, for they say almost anything. Things are fabricated by them, and they lie. They would tell so many lies, and indeed with solemn affirmation that a man would be astonished. If a man listens and believes, they press on, and deceive and seduce in many ways.
I don't know what Acton is. That's why I call him a non-physical personality. In my own meditations, I've met some personalities that are a little shady, you know, but nothing that I would consider demonic in a traditional religious sense.
The problem with mediumship is, perhaps the greatest common denominator, is it's very unnatural for people to turn over their personal sovereignty to another entity. When they do this, they don't know what they're picking up. They don't know who's speaking through them. There's no way that they can test what this voice is, what its source is. And as I've said, that usually, perhaps 99% of the time, if not more, that voice is there as a parasite, no more.
Author Dave Hunt, in his book America, The Sorcerer's New Apprentice, examines channeling.
Carl Jung, in his time, he said, no, these are depths of the psyche, but he came to believe that these are spirit beings. You can't escape it before his death. And he came to believe maybe, hey, they may not all be good. Maybe some of them are evil. So there are people who would say it's the wisdom of the universe, the ancient wisdom. Edgar Mitchell, one of our astronauts at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which he founded, he would say that sort of thing. It's the ancient wisdom that, when you were back in Greek days, you know, they consulted the oracle at Delphi. And there's some kind of a mysterious wisdom that's just built into our genes, into the collective consciousness or psyche of the human race. Others would say, no, these are ascended masters. Elizabeth Clare Prophet, who claims to channel Jesus and Buddha and so forth, she would say that. Others would say it used to be popular to say these are the spirits of the dead. There are a variety of explanations for this. My research indicates they're demons.
While researching mediumship, Western psychologist William James stated, "The refusal of modern enlightenment to treat possession as a hypothesis to be spoken of as even possible, in spite of the massive human experience in its favor, has always seemed to me a curious example of the power of fashion in things scientific." That the demon theory will have its innings again is to my mind absolutely certain. One has to be scientific indeed to be blind and ignorant enough to suspect no such possibility.
Well, they claim to be ascended masters, but in reality, they were the exact opposite end of the spiritual scale. There's no question in my mind now that they were demon spirits. If you had asked me then, I would have believed entirely that they were higher beings, a higher spiritual order of beings. I wouldn't have believed in demons. I didn't think they existed. I thought they were an invention of the Christian church. In retrospect now, I can see back with horrible clarity that they were malevolent, created, demonic spirits intent on our destruction.
Some of these entities out here will say, oh yeah, they're bad spirits and they're good spirits. In fact, the old mediums, before the channelers came along, it was a little more complicated. And the mediums would have a control. It was called a control spirit. And the control function, the function of the control spirit was to keep the bad spirits away and to kind of line things up, you know, and make it work out as it should. And they would even say, oh, that was a lower entity.
In my own case, I recall that some of the entities we had to deal with were overtly violent, almost psychotic. And the others were pure and altruistic, and all they wanted to do was help us, and they would warn us about things that the nasty entities were doing, and they would give us teaching and methods of developing ourselves and so on. In retrospect, I'd like to say that all the entities were equally evil. It was the clever way it was presented by showing this group as overtly evil that made us more ready to accept these guys as the good guys. In reality, they were all in it together.
In evaluating the situation, the reason they appeared to be good or evil was to create a contrast and also to create further deception. You know, it was obviously that the whole thing was an incredible deception, but it would have had no credibility if it was obvious as a deception.
Obviously, what spirits do is warp people's perception of what reality is about. And I think one of the difficult things is that you are really dealing with people who are being duped, is the best word I could say, and in that handing over of themselves to this power, in that handing over, they're going to see that as good stuff and not see that they are moving towards some very destructive things for themselves and for others.
Biblical writers of both Old and New Testament have much to say about the continuous attempt by Satan and evil spirits or demons to deceive the human race. Moses wrote of Satan's enticement and deception of Eve in the Garden of Eden, "You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God." Ramtha, channeled by J.Z. Knight, has stated, "What is termed God is within your being, and that which is called Christ is within your being. And when you know you are God, you will find joy." Helen Schuckman, who claims to channel Jesus, states in her work entitled A Course in Miracles, "God's name is holy, but no holier than yours. To call upon his name is but to call upon your own. You are the Holy Son of God himself."
Helen Schuckman, who was a psychologist at Columbia University, and kept hearing this voice that said, "This is a Course in Miracles, take it down. This is a Course in Miracles, take it down." She didn't want to take it down. She was an atheist. She didn't believe in this other dimension. And she consulted her fellow psychologists, and they said, well, go ahead. And so she took it down, 1,100 pages, A Course in Miracles, which claimed to come from Jesus, but which, in fact, undermined everything Jesus said.
It's the age-old battle between good and evil. The Bible will tell you that the devil will come in many forms. And in a sense, these beings are an aspect of that side of nature, the dark side. And therefore, they don't like mention of Christ. They won't come out usually and say Christ is bad. They will subtly put Christ down. They will say that Christ wasn't really a truly historic figure, that his deeds have been magnified over the years.
All people who are channeling entities, whatever they say they are, Jesus Christ, Buddha, your Aunt Vera, whoever, they're not these pure, altruistic, beautiful beings that they seem to be. If you strip away the covering, you'll find a demon behind every one of these voices, behind every one of the spirits. In fact, one of their most clever ploys is to appear, as the Bible says, even Satan disguises as an angel of light. We're seeing these emissaries of evil that are dressing in the most wonderful packaging, so people are accepting them as genuine. People are seeing them as good and pure. And in reality, even the good ones are demon spirits.
Very clever and subtle manipulation.
St. Paul wrote, "Some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons." Proponents of channeling claim the identity of the spirits is unimportant. Information is all that matters. Truth is subjective. If it sounds right, accept it. Biblical writers warn that these unseen entities are in fact evil spirits, and the people who succumb to their teachings are ultimately deceived. Who are the voices behind this phenomenon? Who goes there?
Well, I'll fill in that blank. It's called a demon, as you can tell. But notice all that Satan had to do, basically create a generation and a whole society and a world that is, frankly, biblically illiterate. And then he takes something that you would think everybody would know to stay away from, demon possession, and then he changes the terminology, channeling. And people eat it up. Also, notice the rationale there, real quick. Why do people go down that route? I really think that a lot of people, part of it is who we are as human beings. The reason why we're not like the animals, the trees, the fleas, the bees, and you and me, we're different. Mankind was created in the image of God. Not only morally, but spiritually. Man was given a spirit nature, unlike the animals and rocks and trees and things of that nature. Which is easily verifiable. How many guys, when you ever mowed your yard, as you were mowing it, the grass is screaming, "Oh, stop, mass murder!" Oh. Right. Doesn't have a spirit, but that part of that spirit, as Ecclesiastes, Solomon says that God set eternity in our hearts so that we might seek Him. So there's a spiritual side of us, and I think we try to fill that hole in our heart with many different things and whatever. And the only one that can fill it, of course, is God, and the only way you get to that is through the one and only way, through the Son of God, Jesus Christ. But notice that people are interested in spiritual things. So Satan creates this atmosphere, this society, this world that is not just ungodly, but they're biblically illiterate. He changes the terminology, and since he knows that they're still interested, there's got to be more to life, and they want answers, then they go down this route. All he has to do is repackage it. Notice how people made the contact. It was what? Get into an altered state of consciousness. And we're going to get into this in more great detail, Lord willing, in our study. But those practices we're going to see are not only being practiced in the world, they're being promoted in schools today, secular world, things of that nature, and they're also being promoted in the church. And I've said this for years. I don't doubt that you, quote, heard a voice. I don't doubt that you had goosebumps on top of your goosebumps. I don't doubt that you had this euphoric reaction. I don't doubt that you thought something that just showered you with light. I don't doubt that you had a spiritual experience, but that was not the Spirit of God. And notice these critters, they just can't help but what? Lie. And then they promote the same lies of Satan that you are God. And they downplay Jesus, and they reveal themselves eventually. But this is what we're going to get into. And just as we close, been there, done that, wish I went and bought the t-shirt. This is what happens every single time. Before I got saved, I was probably demon-possessed multiple times because I was one of these people. And I was trained and did the altered state of consciousness. And not just the breathing exercises, the meditation. Those are the things that are being taught in schools today to your kids, whether you realize or not. And but the other ways that we're going to see you can get into very quickly, almost instantaneously, is with certain psychotropic drugs. The shamans, the American Indians, they use peyote, mescaline to commune with the great white buffalo and stuff. You're opening up spiritual doors. Like the guy said, Mike, my door was probably swinging off the hinges myself. But I thought it was a good thing. But looking back, of course, I agree. Obviously, it was demons. I was probably demon-possessed, and God had mercy upon me. But they were literally driving me insane. Like the one guy says, man, I'm having hallucinations. I'm going nuts. And I was literally being driven insane. I almost lost my mind there at the very end. In fact, to describe it, the only way I could describe it was, and this is about 2 weeks before I got saved, the more I went into it, the worse it got, obviously, because that's what they do. And I was like walking a razor's edge. And when the demonic behavior would heighten, and begin to take control. I had to watch TV, pick up a book, something, just anything. And I had to take every ounce of my being and energy to focus on reality, to just stare at that TV, to look at the pages of the book, to try to, because I was literally feeling myself slipping away. And even as a non-Christian, this thought went through my head. I knew that if I, quote, gave into this, if I didn't fight it, this is what went through my head. This is what it would be like to go insane and never come back. Now, having been, obviously, as a born-again Christian, and having visited, especially more so when I was pastoring in New York, psych wards, I believe a lot of those people there are demonically possessed. Not to get all weird, hyper-charismatic on you, but you could tell something spiritually is going on wrong. And what's sad is, all they do is medicate them instead of telling them about Jesus so they can be set free like I was, instantaneously. The moment I received Christ as my Savior and called upon the name of Jesus Christ, instantly, it's like somebody flipped a light switch. And my sensation was, as I was being saved, I felt like the weight of the world, the sin was leaving me, but it was probably also the demons leaving me. And man, I felt like light as a feather, and it was awesome. So we're going to get into this. Of course, what's the title? That's right. It is Voodoo, Vampires, and the Rise of Demon Worship. And then if we're still alive and still here after 800 years for this study, we're going to finally get into our secret societies, Freemasonry, Illuminati, and all that kind of fun stuff. So let's pray. Father, we love you and thank you so much for our study tonight. We thank you, God, the great news that it's through Jesus Christ and him alone that we can have a direct relationship with you. And it's also through him alone that we can be indwelt by your Spirit, which means the good news is we can never be possessed again by an evil spirit. They can externally mess with us, but they can never internally possess us. And thank you that we don't have to go through all these altered states of consciousness and wonder about truth and be light and deceived to. You've given us a copy of the truth that is guaranteed 100% of the time in the Bible. And so as your people, God, help us to always appreciate what you've given us. Salvation, the Scripture, knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt, and in your Scripture, telling us what to look out for, even with this demonic deception. So prepare our hearts, God, for this next study. We ask all this in your wonderful